American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tellustrate video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
What time is it? Game time! It's gonna be special. They gonna talk about this forever.
Welcome to American Football Stories.
Puts his head down, crashes and spins, and dives. Touchdown!
Bringing together the many perspectives that make up college football in the NFL.
Football is one of the greatest sports ever invented.
From players and coaches.
Believe, baby, believe, baby.
Hey, we playing to win right here, fellas.
To the front office and scouts.
The public is finally beginning to catch up, but they don't even know half the truth.
Us against the world, let's get it.
Your hosts, Robert Parker and Nick Knudsen, bring you American Football Stories.
Welcome to the American Football Stories podcast brought to you by Coach Paint. My name is Nick Knudsen. My co-host is Robert Parker. Today is March 2nd, 2021, and we'd like to welcome Nathan King, who covers the Auburn Tigers for 24/7 Sports. I believe it's called Auburn Undercover. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Looking forward to it. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, you've had an entertaining couple of months down on the plains, little Gus Malzahn drama. I feel like, are you going to miss the Gus Malzahn drama? Because it wasn't too many off seasons you went into without Gus Malzahn drama, right? From the outside.
It got fatiguing after a while, to be honest. And not because, the possibility of a coaching change. I guess exciting is a word for it, but it was just the same problems, if that makes sense. So it's not like there was any sort of new storylines every offseason. It was like the same issues were happening every year. The same people wanted him gone. The same people wanted him to stay. It was like the freaking Twilight Zone every single year. And finally, it was too much. I think he's an above average coach. I think he'll do really well at UCF, but it's just, y'all know when you look at that, it's not even mediocrity, it's still like Auburn's floor was pretty high under him. It's just the fact that you keep seeing the same problems, mostly offensively, year after year. You've got to make a change eventually. So I am going to miss Gus, though. He's a good guy. He's a nice guy. He's kind of a goober.
It's almost like it's like a couple that fights a lot, and they'd be like, "Oh, Gus has got a new bracelet. I guess things are okay." I guess it was like that kind of back and forth, where it's like, "Oh, it finally happened. All right." But hey, I honestly, Auburn's in a good spot. It's just we'll get to the unavoidable shadow in Tuscaloosa that Auburn must operate under on a day-to-day basis. But let's dive into the Gus Malzahn era. 8 seasons, 13 seconds away from national title in year one. Magical season, lots of big plays, plays that will forever stick in the history of Auburn, with that Hail Mary at Georgia, the kick six, of course. And like I said, 13 seconds away from national title in the Rose Bowl. 2 other New Year's Six appearances, and really almost the most impressive piece of the resume. 3-5 against Nick Saban in Alabama, but it wasn't enough to the folks who matter behind the scenes. At the end of the day, after 8 years, and they've officially parted ways with, I want to say, was it a $21 million buyout?
21 and a half. And because Jimmy Sexton might be the best agent in sports, none of that was mitigated. So he kept every dollar of that, every penny, and he got his new UCF deal. So he's a very rich man. He doesn't care about it, though. He's not the kind of person who cares about money. He wants to sit on his rocking chair and drink sweet tea. He is a very simple man, but he's also a very rich man now. Yes.
They do have Waffle Houses in Orlando. So I think.
Exactly. All he wants to do is eat a Waffle House. Yes.
That's awesome. But so let's go back to what actually brought Gus to Auburn after 1 year at Arkansas State. Of course, he was the offensive coordinator when the national title was won under Gene Chizik. But what was the energy like when he first came in? And of course, that fast start in 2013, I mentioned the UGA, the kick six. How much goodwill did that season ultimately buy him, looking now that we have a complete story?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, if you're lucky, you're a big time college football program. You've got a handful of all time seasons, seasons that any college football fan remembers and can point to. Teams like Florida and USC and Texas in recent memory, that kind of stuff. If you're really lucky, you can have a dynasty like Alabama's. But the 2010 season for Auburn, I think, is one of those years, and that's because Cam Newton, not only one of the best players in SEC history, not one Auburn history, but also just college football history. And anytime something like that happens, I think you look at who was linked to it. And I don't know if y'all remember, but I mean, Cam Newton's first and second year in the NFL, he talked about Gus Malzahn a lot. And he and Gus were very, very close. So I think, yes, the goodwill was bought for him in 2010 so that when he went to Arkansas State, he was successful there. He won the conference there in just one season. When they parted ways with Gene Chizik and needed to bring in somebody in 2013, the front runners for the search committee were Jay Jacobs, who was the athletic director at Auburn, who is now, I believe, still in a front office job at Florida, and Bo Jackson, who everybody knows. And those two have loved Gus forever. And they pretty much credited him with a lot of the success under Gene Chizik. So it was kind of a no-brainer hire back in 2013. Everybody wanted him. Everybody thought he was really good. Kirby Smart also got interviewed, and a lot of people were pretty high on him. But, I mean, it was tough to get the Cam Newton, infatuation of that incredible 2010 season and everything linked to Gus Malzahn. It was tough to get that out of Auburn fans' heads and for them to not think Gus is the guy for the future. And like you said, after 2013, they definitely thought that. I mean, yeah, they were disappointed 13 seconds from a national championship, but with everything they did in that season, there was no doubt in anybody's mind that he was the right hire and that they picked the right guy after Gene Chizik was fired.
Yeah, and of course, he was kind of a coaching legend in that part of the country anyway before. He was linked with Mitch Mustaine. They had the season at Arkansas together, I believe, and under Houston Nutt that ended up being I was successful, but it ultimately just the personalities didn't work out. Successful tenure at Tulsa as OC and Arkansas State before that, jumped to Auburn. So you definitely see the appeal. But after that first season, ultimately doesn't win. That he loses at least 4 games this season. And so that is at Auburn, you want to compete for titles and everything. Makes the SEC title game though in 2017 before falling to Georgia. But that run netted Malzahn a 7-year, $49 million contract extension that kept him we just talked about the 21 mil that they're on the hook for through 2024. But what were the behind the scenes dynamics? So just like Gus, it felt like poor Gus that he always gets picked on and everything. But hey, when the opportunity struck, Gus struck back and got that 7-year deal done behind the scenes. So I mean, it's a game they both played, and they seem to both sides seem to play it pretty well.
Yeah, the thought was that season, and there's varying levels of not only how legitimate this is, a legitimacy, but also just of what people want to think about how interested Arkansas was in him. So the thought is, okay, Arkansas was begging him to come home. Like you just said, he had a great career and a great tenure at Arkansas. He's an Arkansas guy.
High school.
It's a high school football legend there in terms of coaching. So the thought was Arkansas is trying to bring him home, and Auburn needed to do something to parry that deal. And unfortunately, that deal happened right before the SEC title game. So you get him on the hook. They just beaten. I remember watching some sort of Sports Center or something, and they beat number 1 Georgia, they beat number 1 Alabama. They were going to the title game. They were number 2 in the playoff rankings. I remember watching Kirk Herbstreit say, "This is the best team in college football." He said, "Nobody's going to beat this team. Look at what they just did to the 2 best teams in the country back to back. Georgia's not going to beat them in Atlanta, and they're my favorite to win the playoff." And you can just imagine hearing those words in Auburn and how excited people were. And like you said, Gus sort of rode that out. And again, Jimmy Sexton, best agent alive. He was able to tap into the gold mine there. And then, yeah, like you said, I'm glad you brought up the 4 losses per season. Yeah, because I think that's people from the outside who don't really realize why things started to slide for him at Auburn. He won enough games, but when you're losing that consistently and things never really get over the hump, that's when you start to fall behind, especially when your biggest rivals are Georgia and Alabama, who are doing pretty good things in their own right.
Brutal existence. But I mean, you can see it was the second time in 4 seasons that you're in the national title hunt. So you see the thinking in 2017,
Right.
why he gets that type of contract. But Rob's going to dive into the inevitable doom here for Auburn fans here, the inevitable Alabama shadow.
Yeah, so definitely, Auburn's kind of been in that Alabama shadow for the longest. And we all know that Bama is a machine, but did Gus get enough credit for how well his teams played against Saban and the Tide? I mean, he's 3-5 against them in his career. So it just seems from the outside looking in that he really didn't get a lot of credit for that win streak against Saban.
I think from like you said, from the outside, no, he didn't get enough. But people in Auburn and this fan base, this fan base is just brutal. They looked at everything else. They wanted to kind of ignore that fact. But at the same time, I kind of don't blame them for doing that, because the Alabama wins were almost as frustrating as they were exciting, because they never really netted you any sort of rings or anything like that. I mean, yeah, they won the SEC title game in 2013 and went to the national championship. But really, when you take away that season, what other Alabama victories were really significant? I thought the 2019 Alabama win was actually really good. A 9-3 regular season with a freshman quarterback was great for them, but that team had an asterisk because Tua Tagovailoa was hurt. And then in 2017, incredible win. One of the best environments I've ever seen was the 2017 Iron Bowl. And what do you do after that? You turn right around and get smacked by Georgia in the SEC title game. So I do think, I don't think he got enough credit from people in Auburn, but at the same time, I do sort of understand why people kind of discredited that. Not discredited, but didn't focus on it enough, because you want to look at the end result and you want to look at championships, and those never didn't necessarily come consistently enough.
And then we want to jump in and also kind of highlight, just like we talked about before, about, Gus Malzahn, pretty much consistently losing 4 games a season. But other than that, what was some of the major factors that led to Malzahn's dismissal? Was it, administrative issues? Was it, something behind the scenes that, from the outside looking in, you just couldn't really see, and you just chalk it up as, you can't beat Nick Saban, which is your rival, and you can't win the big one? Was it more so of the administrative side, or was it more so of the on the field stuff?
I mean, 90% of it, I would say, on the field, just because that's where you make your bread. Like, that's going to be the number one thing. But Auburn is a really tough job in the sense that there's a lot of people involved. A lot of people put money into the program and feel like they have a say-so. And I think we talked about it before we got on, that it seemed like, or maybe that was at the beginning of the show, every offseason it was the same song and dance with him. And the reason that was the case is because the same people are involved in the athletic department. The same people are boosters, all that kind of stuff. And the same people wanted him gone. The same people wanted him to stay. This season, which makes sense because he got canned, the 2020 season felt like the most, like you said, behind the scenes pressure, felt like the most of his career so far. It just felt like as the season went on, you got blown out by Georgia, got blown out by Alabama, inexplicably lost at South Carolina. Granted, 2020 was weird for everybody, but it just felt like that pressure was kind of mounting. So yes, I'd say it was definitely a factor off the field stuff. Not that he ever did anything wrong, because Auburn never had any sort of violations, or even players like minor getting in trouble. Really didn't happen at Auburn. There's the one thing you can't say about Gus Malzahn is that he didn't run a clean program, because he certainly did. And that's a really, really good factor for him in his coaching career. But pressure started to mount over time, and it was really just kind of the outside forces not being happy with his final results. But like I said, most of it is on the field. Most of it is how many wins and losses you have at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, he lost too many games too consistently for Auburn to give him another year. He would have been a dead man walking, really, if he had stayed for another season.
So we talked about that 21 million and a half buyout earlier. What was some of the, the reaction around the Auburn fan base, and, just, casual fans and just the diehard Auburn fans when, Gus Malzahn bounces back and take the UCF job? So it really seemed like, we talked about Gus Malzahn maybe being that average coach, but at the end of the day, for a program like UCF, he might be the perfect fit. So was there a little bit of trepidation from, the Auburn fans saying, hey, we got rid of Gus, but, now we got to kind of rebuild and reload and restart over?
Yeah, I think him taking the UCF job shows how the rest of the college football world views him in terms of his caliber of coaching ability. Because like I said, he is an above average coach. And everybody else except the people in Auburn think that, because the people in Auburn are the ones who had to deal with it. So I would say more than half, probably 60, 70% of people were really happy for him. He's brought a ton of UCF staffers. Travis Williams, a really well-liked assistant coach at Auburn, is now his defensive coordinator. Just analysts, people from Auburn, bringing people like that over. A former Auburn analyst is now his cornerbacks coach. Yeah, and then Big Cat Bryant today. I know everybody likes that name. Yeah, he's great. Only to be outdone by Smoke Monday. But Big Cat's the third former Auburn player to follow him to UCF. So, and two of the guys were on a running back and a wide receiver were guys who were kind of buried on the depth chart, and people would say, oh, well, Gus doesn't know how to use talent, and he doesn't recognize talent, and he's not letting these really good players play. Well, if that was really the case, why would they want to play for him again? So some of these things, it's kind of like retrospective is being debunked. But I think most Auburn fans were happy for him. I know that we wrote a lot of stuff that day because spring practice hasn't started and Zoom press conferences. And there were some people who were like, was this the UCF site? Stop covering Gus. I'm like, all right, guys, he was the head coach for 8 years. Like, it's a pretty big deal, that he left. And that's besides the point. That's my own aggressions coming out. But yeah, I'd say most Auburn fans are pretty happy for him. And again, I think it's a great hire for UCF. I think he can win 9 or 10 games a year for them for the next 20 years if he wants to, and he will be absolutely worshipped. So I think it's really good for him.
Hey, we just talked to Jeff Sharon of the Black and Gold Banneret with SB Nation last week, and they are fired up for Gus down in Orlando. So, great perspective overall. At the end of the day, though, it's like you said, you're watching. Even when Saban and Bama don't make the SEC title game, they're converting and winning national titles. I mean, that's just got to be a brutal. A ton of respect for the rivalry with Auburn and Bama, and it's just got to be a brutal existence with Alabama being this successful right now. I mean, hey, Robert and I we're Florida Gator fans here, and it's brutal watching it from the East. I mean, yet alone being in the same state in the Iron Bowl. But hey, great success against Alabama. Kids, comparatively to the rest of the world, he's doing pretty good. Outside of maybe Dabo, he's doing pretty good. So, but let's get into the post Malzahn madness here. And I just, from the outside, I still don't fully understand this. Was Kevin Steele just really tight with a couple of boosters or something? Like, because how weird was that story? That what don't we know about it just from the outside? Because when I heard that, I was like, wait, you're getting rid of the guy because you obviously want to change, and you're hiring the defensive coordinator who, by all intents and purposes, good defensive coordinator, but not a great track record as a head coach. And he had a shot down at Baylor. Things changed. I get it. People get other chances, but it just seemed like a really weird coup. And why Kevin Steele? Why did we pick that guy? What was going on behind the scenes there?
Those 2 weeks before Bryan Harsin was hired. I mean, I laugh about it now, looking back. That was an absolute nightmare. I mean, it was fun. I had a good time.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt. I didn't mean to, but was that purely booster driven?
Most the Kevin Steele stuff?
Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head when you said that he had connections lined up by the time the job had come open, because this is something that was not decided the day Gus was fired, obviously. This was a few weeks in advance. It's my opinion that after they got blown out in the Iron Bowl, that was when everybody sort of made the decision that they were going to move on from Gus. And like you said, Kevin Steele, really successful. I mean, and he's a good guy too. I hate that this whole situation has kind of tarnished him, I guess, a little bit, because Auburn's identity completely shifted over the last 4 years because Gus's offenses started, to be frank, started being pretty bad. Mm-hmm. And Auburn instead was, these standout defensive players, absolute studs on defense. And so that was becoming their identity. But yeah, like you said, a great defensive coordinator. But to replace the guy you just spent $21.5 million on with the defensive coordinator, it was a matter of Auburn's athletic director, Alan Green, and their president, Jay Goosh, stepping in. Everybody wanted to hire Kevin Steele. And I feel comfortable talking about this now because it's been long enough. But they wanted to hire Kevin Steele. The other half of the group, I guess is the best way to put it, came in and was like, no, we need to conduct a search. Like, this is a really big deal. Gus was here for 8 years. We need to make sure we land the right guy. And so, boy, that whole process bought Alan Green so much kudos with Auburn fans, because Auburn fans know how it is here. It's like Texas. I'm trying to think of another program that's like this, where boosters are so involved. And he really stuck it to him. He sort of put his foot down and said, this is what you hired me to do. And for lack of a better phrase, you need to get out of my way and let me do my job. So he went out and did his job, and obviously plucked Bryan Harsin from Boise State, who was one of his top candidates, a guy who he's known for a while and that he really liked. So that's kind of how that whole process went, I guess, in a nutshell. But yeah, pretty crazy. When I thought they were going to hire Kevin Steele, I was like, man, this is not going to be good. Auburn fans are not going to be happy. But, a lot of Auburn fans are pretty happy that it went the other way. And they're pretty happy with Harsin, I think, too.
So Green steps in. How long, just for perspective, how long has Green been on the job?
I covered his introductory press conference when I was a sophomore in college. So I think 2017?
Yeah.
No, 2018. Excuse me,
So
2018. Because
years.
Jay Jacobs was still there in 17. Yes.
Yeah. So a few years.
A few years.
Long enough to know some people. This booster group you're talking about, how big's the club we're talking about? Are we talking like 60 people? Are we talking like 8?
I mean, it's so vague, and like, I don't know. I mean, there's definitely a few influential people who make their voices heard. But at the same time, there's also influential people pushing back on them. So I think it's less of, the people who just want things done their way always have it done their way. I think it's more of just they kind of create a stir, and that kind of creates problems for everybody. It's like, all right, can we just get on the same page here? And that's exactly what Alan Green did. He got everybody on the same page and said, let me lead the way. And eventually they let him do it. And I thought he got one of the best candidates on the market.
I love the craziness with Auburn. It's like the most symbolic beauty of college football, the crazy system that is college football. So Auburn just fascinates me. Sorry for all the questions on that, but basically you said that, I mean, obviously credit to Alan Green, gets a ton of credit for kind of taking control of the situation. I was a little stunned with the Harsin hire because he's a Boise State guy. So I didn't even think like that was a guy who was looking to leave anywhere. Coincidentally followed Gus at Arkansas State. He was a replacement for Gus and then left Arkansas State after a year to go to Boise. But Harsin, great run out at Boise, ran that program real well. You got to be pretty pumped up about this guy coming in. Even though I bet you a lot of people didn't know a ton about him before they hired him.
He said, well, Alan Green's no. Maybe I guess he said it in his introductory press conference. He said, I know I'm not from around here. I know a bunch of you watching this probably Wikipedia'd me as soon as they hired him. But I mean, you kind of put it the way that I put it when he got hired is there's no way to slice it that he's a bad hire. Like you could argue that he's not the most incredible hire in the world, and you could want somebody else. But you look at what he did at Boise State, and it's like, I don't know how he had the third best winning percentage, I think, over the last 7 years behind Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney. Like, I mean, it's not the same. It's not Power 5, but still, I mean, pretty impressive stuff. And especially following up a legend like Chris Peterson and sort of sustaining that success. The thing about Harsin is he brings such a different attitude to this program. Like I said, the best way I could describe Gus, and this is probably a little disrespect. I have so much respect for Gus, but the way I describe him as a goober. He's just a funny guy. He's just an interesting guy. But he's really nice, like one of the nicest guys on the planet. That is not to say that Harsin is not nice, but Harsin is very intense, and he sort of gives off this more of like football guy, really intense, going to get up in your face and be about it every single practice. And we're already sort of seeing that. He is a guy that'll get up for 5 a.m. workouts and do them with the players, like get up and do some bench presses and stuff like that. And you just wouldn't have seen that from Gus. Like, that's not to say it's better or worse, because we're going to find out on the field. But it's just interesting. Like the culture switch has been so night and day. And that's what a lot of Auburn fans wanted. They kind of wanted a total reset, not only of the head coach, but kind of the feeling and the culture around the program.
And I'm gonna let Rob dive into that in a second. But I did see an interview with him. Is he a drag racer? Has he done drag racing in the past?
Yeah, his dad. There's a really great story. If y'all look up Bryan Harsin drag racing, you should see the one from Philip Marshall at our site talking to Harsin's dad. Yeah, he would help his dad like build and his dad is a drag racer. And so by the time I think he was like 11 years old, he was getting behind the wheel of some of these cars. And he used that sort of as an analogy in his first press conference, talking about how, yeah, we want to go fast and yeah, we want to, get going in the SEC and do lots of good things and have a great offense. But if you don't put that thing together with the right parts in the first place, you're going to break down in the middle of the race and you're going to lose. So that's pretty cheesy, but I mean, I thought it's pretty good. Pretty good analogy, but yeah. He's a drag racer. So I don't know. It's fitting. You talk to him one time and you're like, yeah, I can see how you drag race. He's just like got that kind of personality.
So Nathan, the Gus bus has moved on to UCF, but Gus recruiting Bo Nix, it really seemed like Bo Nix at the quarterback position was tailor made for Gus Malzahn's offense. So with him out and Bryan Harsin coming in, how do you see Bo Nix moving forward? At the quarterback position.
Yeah, the thing about Gus Malzahn, one of his detriments and drawbacks, and people talking about some things that ailed him during his time at Auburn, was he wasn't necessarily a great quarterback developer. It seems so contradictory to people outside the program because you're like Cam Newton, but Cam Newton came in and he was kind of already Cam Newton. There wasn't going to be anybody who was going to stop Cam Newton from being Cam Newton. Now, did Gus sort of marry his hurry up, no huddle system to Newton's skill set? Yes. And then Nick Marshall was also very competitive and a really good player. But it sort of seemed like if you're not that ultra athletic dual threat quarterback and you're more of a pocket passer, you don't really develop under Gus Malzahn, because Jarrett Stidham came in from Baylor, was great for his first season, and then he regressed. He was pretty bad actually for most of 2018. The thing with Bo Nix was he still hasn't taken that step that you would expect to see out of a 5-star quarterback. Now, a lot of that is offensive line. Auburn's offensive line has been downright terrible recently. I mean, if you guys are Florida fans, you watched the 2019 game. Bo Nix was absolutely thought he was going to die every time he got the ball. I mean, he got absolutely no protection. And so the thinking now is that you've got Bryan Harsin coming in, who has a really good track record. Somebody named Kellen Moore comes to mind, Brett Rippon as well. And Mike Bobo is now the offensive coordinator. And some people sort of see Mike Bobo as a stale hire, sort of an SEC retread. I can totally see that. But at the same time, you're getting two of the best quarterback gurus. I mean, you look at their track record and you can't really argue that. In the industry right now, you're getting them together. Bobo's going to call the plays, but Harsin said they're really just kind of going to mesh their offensive ideas and put it into one DNA. So, I mean, if you're Auburn, Bo Nix probably has the best quarterback tutelage right now that he's had in his career. And that's pretty exciting from their standpoint. Now the question is, can he put it together? He lost all of his receivers, his top 3 receivers from last year. His offensive line is all back, but for like the 3rd straight season, we're asking, like, is that a good thing that all the offensive linemen are back? So, I mean, they've cleaned house. The new staff, obviously, they don't have any prior, knowledge of these players. They're just going to pick the best starters out there. So, going to be really interesting to see how the position battles start to shake out. But yeah, on the subject of Bo Nix, I think he's a great player, got a great arm, great talent. I think the coaching's been a little off so far, but also he hasn't been perfect. So it'll be interesting to see how things look for him his junior year, kind of with a total reset right now.
Yeah, just like you mentioned, Bo Nix hasn't been great himself, with the ups and downs and like the roller coaster. We saw Joey Gatewood leave the program. Was it a certain, fan base out there in the Auburn land that was calling for Joey Gatewood to kind of, get his shine before he kind of entered the transfer portal and moved on to Kentucky?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. The Florida game, the LSU game. There's one other one that I'm not thinking of. There were 3 games in Bo Nix's true freshman season that was like almost unwatchable in terms of how bad he was. But again, I'm going to lump the offensive line in. I'm not going to discredit Bo because when somebody has no time to throw. But it was. His QBR was just like one of the worst in Auburn history in those games. And then somehow he was worse in the LSU game. And every time, I think somebody from the outside would think Joey Gatewood's going to come in. But Gus made the commitment to Bo Nix, and he really thought that, all right, this guy's a true freshman. It's more important for his long-term success that I leave him in. Maybe Joey Gatewood plays a package here and there, but this guy needs to stay confident. And you know what? To his credit, at the end of the season, Bo Nix was great in that Alabama game in the Iron Bowl. I mean, talk about a gamer. He was an absolute dude in that game, making some crazy throws. He can make great plays with his legs too. And I think a big part of that was because of that confidence. You know, Gus stuck with him. And the thinking was from Gus, this is my guy for 4 years, right? He was like, I'm kind of tied at the hip with him. He's my prize quarterback recruit. I think he's going to win a championship before he leaves. He would say that all the time. Now, obviously, Gus isn't there to sort of be with him for these last 2 years. So, yeah, there's definitely a group that wanted Joey Gatewood to play, but Bo Nix came in and won the job for a reason, and that's because Joey Gatewood couldn't really throw the ball, and Bo Nix kind of has that golden arm. So I think that was kind of what played out over the course of the season. But to answer your question, yes, there were definitely Auburn fans who wanted Bo Nix pulled. And even this season, when his backups weren't that good and were kind of just, backup quarterbacks, they still wanted him pulled then, which is ridiculous. But they say a lot of ridiculous things, so it didn't really surprise me.
Yeah, you got Tank Bigsby coming back on that offensive side of the ball this year, and we saw lots of flashes from him last year. How big in terms of Nix's development do you think is? How much do you think that offense is going to lean on Bigsby to help Nix develop this year? We know Harsin liked the running game at Boise State.
Yeah, Harsin's going to build this offense around the quarterback's strengths. That's what he said he's going to do. That's what he and Bobo are going to do. That's what he did at Boise State. But at the same time, Boise State had one of the longest 1,000-yard rusher streaks in the country under Harsin. And now they get a guy who I think – here's the thing about Tank Bigsby that a lot of people don't realize. And I saw a ranking today. I don't know. I can't remember. It might have been a 24/7 Sports ranking. Whoops. Not everybody's always right. And that Bigsby was like the 5th best running back in the conference coming back. No way. He when he's healthy, he's the best or the second best. And I'm not just that's not just because I see him all the time. I didn't watch anybody else this season in the SEC who's going to be coming back next year. Obviously, Najee Harris was kind of a step ahead that ran like him. And the rate at which he broke tackles was just insane. I think he's a generational player at Auburn. I really do. He has the most breakout NFL, Heisman, whatever you want to call it, potential in this roster, offense or defense. He is their most impressive player. He's their best athlete on the entire roster. And I think by the time he leaves, he could be one of the best running backs in Auburn history. He is just that good. Like when he's healthy and he gets 20 carries a game, he is just destroying dudes. It's absolutely unbelievable. He was only a true freshman. So in terms of the offense's explosiveness and their propensity to put up big numbers, that's going to depend on the quarterback. But kind of to your point, play to play, yeah, that's going to be on Tank Bigsby and this offensive line in terms of its run blocking. That's going to be on them because they think the same things I do. This whole staff thinks that he is just a phenomenal player. There were some rumors that he might leave if Cadillac Williams wasn't retained as running backs coach, and that might have been something that happened because he and Cadillac are tied at the hip. But Cadillac was brought back. Tank will be here for another few seasons.
That's not a hard sell. That probably wasn't a hard sell to the Auburn folks.
No, Cadillac coming back.
Yeah, that's probably not a hard sell.
Tank might be the best running back since Cadillac by the time he's done. They love him. They love Cadillac Williams. So
how is your name? Your name's Tank, and there's a guy with a cooler name than you in the building. Like,
I know. How's that possible? Or Smoke. Smoke's a contender as well.
Yeah,
we love Smoke, but yeah.
Hey, overall though. You talked about the culture change. It just basically to me, it just sounds like there needed to be just maybe just refresh the program a little bit. Like things got stale with Gus, but I look at Gus, you still say Gus UCF job still pretty good. Like he's clearly highly thought of around the country. Are you much better with Harsin right now, or is this just a roll of the dice and we just need something new? Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's totally the second one. And it's just because there's no way to tell. Now, my opinion is Harsin's going to be really successal. I just think he's already recruited really well. I mean, this Auburn class was 48th in the country when he took over, and they're going to finish in the top 20. And that is just so huge because that transition class, if you tank that transition class, I mean, that's going to hurt you like 3 years in the future and you don't even know it yet. So I think his recruiting plan, I think he put together a really good staff. And again, like we talked about when he was hired from Boise State, there's just no reason to think he was a bad hire. Like everything about him was just phenomenal on his resume. So, but to your point, now that's all projection. That's all he could tank. I mean, people hire good, quote, good coaches all the time and they perform terribly. It is the reset thing. They just needed to reset.
Right.
They needed to go out and get a quality coach because is Bryan Harsin that much better than Gus Malzahn? We have no idea. I think at face value, I would probably put them in about the same category because you look at a guy that was pretty good at Auburn in the SEC and a guy who was really good in the group of five. I think those are pretty comparable. So, yeah, it was totally just the facelift needed. Like we talked about before, they needed a complete culture change. And so we'll see how it plays out on the field. Yeah.
Several other SEC schools wanted this guy, but he ends up at Auburn, South Carolina, LSU, Florida, even though Florida's holding on to their defensive coordinator. But Derek Mason might be the best hire on the staff.
Yeah. Man, I love Derek Mason. He's awesome. Anybody who, I mean, y'all from the SEC East, Vanderbilt is not an easy place to win. And it's hard to, I think he got fired after 7 seasons. It's hard to stay anywhere more than 5 years, just in college football nowadays, let alone the SEC. But the energy that he brought, I mean, they would snag a few ranked wins here and there. And I mean, at Vandy, that was pretty good. Just what a likable personality. I know he and Dan Mullen almost got into it a couple of years ago, but that almost makes him more likable. I mean, he's got that fire to him. Now, I've talked to a bunch of people who were part of that Vanderbilt program, a bunch of people who know him closely, who just think this is the perfect spot for him because he does want to be a head coach again, and he'd be the first person to say that. But it seems like this is just the perfect spot to slide in. Like we talked about before, the identity of this Auburn team right now is defense. They're loaded on defense. They're above average on defense next year. They'll have a good defense. And so Kevin Steele left the cupboard pretty full. And yeah, I think Derek Mason, I mean, he's the one you're right. He's the one I talk about the most. Mike Bobo, I think, can be pretty good, but he's a bit of viewed by a lot of people as a bit of a retread. Whereas Derek Mason, it's like, man, he was just the head coach somewhere. And I don't think you meet many college football fans or people in the industry that don't think really highly of him. So he's a guy Harsin wanted to work with for a long time. Actually, they've known each other for a while. So he was pretty excited to be able to finally bring him onto one of his staffs.
Plus, Will Muschamp has to hit I think 3 or 4 more SEC programs before he makes his way back to Auburn.
Yeah.
That couldn't happen yet.
He'll make the rounds.
He'll be back.
And then we'll talk again in 6 or 7 years. And he'll be there are people like, oh man, I love Will Muschamp, just one of the most interesting coaches.
Love Will Muschamp.
I mean, there were I kid you not, there were people who thought he should be Auburn's head coach.
Yep.
I mean, the dude just got fired from South Carolina.
That's how likable he is, though. Think about it. That's how likable he is.
And he spent 1 season as Auburn's DC.
Yeah.
And they weren't even that good. And he made that sort of impact. So yeah, Will Muschamp, I hope he's a coach forever. I hope he coaches till he's 100 because he's just that guy who's always around, always doing something. He's always a threat to get on your staff. Yeah.
Heartbreaking to see him at Georgia, though, back at Georgia, but whatever.
Definitely is.
Yeah. Hey, Rob and I were talking about this before the call, Nathan, but Harsin at Boise State. Rob, where they traveled to Air Force, Hawaii, San Jose State, a little bit of a different life in the SEC West. Obviously, Auburn's one of the toughest jobs in the country in general, but we talked about Alabama, Georgia. You got A&M, Ole Miss is rising, all these things. But next year specifically, let's talk about 2021. At Penn State, at LSU, at Texas A&M, on top of the Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama matchups. Do you think Harsin, if he comes out the gate and let's say goes, 5-7, 4-8, something out the gate, which honestly would be totally reasonable with this schedule and with some turnover on the roster and maybe a short recruiting cycle. If disaster did strike and that happened, is this guy even going to get a fair shake with the Auburn fan base?
I would hope. I mean, goodness, I hope so, because I'm of the opinion that, I don't care. I care a little bit, but I don't care much what the team looks like in year one. of a new coaching staff.
Well, we've established you're rational. I'm talking about Auburn fans.
Right. And like, I think to the I know it's like not the best example because he's now no longer there, but I think to like Jeremy Pruitt's first year at Tennessee, when they were like, they're bad, but they beat Auburn on the road, and they would win these games where they were really, really fired up, and they sort of looked like they were buying in, and then they lose games where it still looked like they were buying in. I think as long as you establish yourself that you've really changed this culture and the team looks like it's different, I mean, I think he'd be fine. Yes, 30 to 40% of Auburn fans would want him fired after just the first year. But I think most are kind of the understanding that it really wouldn't be that big of a deal. I mean, this is still a really good roster. This is a roster that was built by Malzahn to win in 2021. So they're pretty good. Other than wide receiver, where they lose everybody, everywhere else is returning a lot of talent. So I think his floor for next season is probably like a 6-6. But for me, it's more of looking ahead to the future, and all these other programs are being built up pretty well with really good head coaches, I think, in the SEC all around.
Particularly out west.
I mean, yeah, you just wonder, I mean, how much these teams are going to beat each other up, and how much they're really going to contend with Alabama until Nick Saban retires. Because, yeah, it's hard to find a bunch of duds. You know, it all seems like they've all hit on really good hires recently, and have really good head coaches leading things into the future.
Yeah, and I crack on Auburn, but we're working on driving Dan Mullen out of town after multiple 10-win seasons. So, you know, after a decade of doing nothing, we're too good for 10-win seasons in Gainesville too. So we're just as crazy. But hey, like I'm gonna kick one over to Rob real quick. Rob, SEC West over the next 5 years with Kiffin and Leach, A&M with Jimbo, Edo at LSU, Pittman at Arkansas, and of course you got Saban and Bama. Where do you see Auburn fitting into the SEC West puzzle, Rob? And then we'll kick that over to Nathan.
Yeah, just like Nathan said, I think, Bryan coming in is definitely going to be a culture change. But once again, he talked about that fan base. 30 to 40% of that fan base say, hey, if he comes out the gate slow, yeah, we're going to be calling for his job. But at the end of the day, I think Auburn's going to fit in where Auburn's kind of been fitting in the last couple of years until they kind of, get everything back together. I know Lane Kiffin is there. You got Jimbo, but those guys have struggled as head coaches before. So couple recruiting classes can change that around in a minute. So I definitely got Auburn in the top 4. In the SEC West.
Yeah, and like you said, that's just where they are. Not only that's where they were under Malzahn. The Tommy Tuberville era was pretty successful. Yeah, but I think when you're an Auburn fan, most people understand that this is a program history, because LSU and Alabama, I mean, these teams have been good forever. Florida, they've been good a really long time. And you don't have the same pedigree. Auburn's an A program. I don't think they're an A+ program, though. They're a top 15 school, top 15 program. They're not a top 5 or a top 10. So it's like they've always just kind of been on that precipice. And I think that's what a lot of people need to understand, is that if Auburn wins a national title every 15 years, that's incredible, because they've only won 2 ever.
Right.
So, but the thing that's also encouraging, though, I think for Auburn fans, is that there hasn't been a hire. I mean, I don't have like the page of all-time head coaches in front of me, but this is just something we talked about a lot when Harsin got hired. You have to go back like 50 or 60 years to find the last Auburn head coach who didn't obtain some sort of success. And that's what a really good program that has really good resources will do for you. I mean, you go back, Malzahn took them to a title game. Chizik won a national championship. Tuberville should have been in the national title game. They went undefeated in 2004. And just back and back and back, those previous head coaches as well, 10-win season, SEC championships, top 3 finishes. There's no reason to, if Harsin doesn't have a season or 2 like that in his Auburn tenure, it would be an incredible anomaly. So I think that's what, as the SEC gets tougher and they beat up on each other and the coaches are really good, something that Auburn can hang its hat on is, look, we've been a above average program for our entire lives. And with a really good head coaching resume right now in Bryan Harsin, no matter what the rest of the SEC looks like, there's pretty much no reason to think that's going to change.
I mean, for most of the history since the SEC split into the divisions, the East and the West in 92, it's pretty much LSU, Auburn, and Alabama. That's your race out west. Texas A&M, I mean, they need to earn their stripes. Don't get me wrong. I'm not ready to just crown them. But when you talk about resource rich and you talk about the investment they made in Jimbo Fisher and Jimbo's track record and the progress we saw on the field this year, my Lord, they look like they're coming pretty quick. And we saw how LSU could just turn it on for a year. Is this going to be a matter of like A&M's going to have a year, LSU's going to have a year, Auburn's going to have a year, Bama's going to have a year? Or do you see A&M really rising up and challenging on a year-to-year basis with Alabama?
Oh God, no. I mean, I think they could. that's just somebody who's lived in the state for a long time. I mean, Alabama. I don't know. You just look at their recruiting class this year and what they have lined up, and you're just like, good Lord. But I mean, until Saban
maybe
retired,
we shouldn't talk about Alabama because it's like we know. Like,
oh no, yeah. But no, I think it's a good question because you're talking about, like you said, Auburn, and that's interesting to bring up, is like Auburn and LSU have been the ones besides Alabama recently, and over the course of history, it's like, now does Texas A&M join that top group? And moving forward in the Jimbo Fisher era, are they part of that top group? I see no reason why not. Like you said, great season last year. Blue chip ratio has been really high, really good recruiting classes. Quarterback play, I think, has a chance with Haynes King and some of the other good prospects they've been bringing in over the past few years. They've just had a good quarterback track record. I thought Kellen Mond was pretty average, and so you can kind of, I think if you improve at that position, like you said, Jimbo Fisher's track record, they could be that team if they keep doing this consistently. They could be that team that whenever Alabama has an off year, because they have them, every 5 years. Whenever Alabama doesn't win the West, is Texas A&M that team that consistently is coming in second place? Because that's all you can really ask for right now. You can't ask to consistently come in first place, but you can all, vie for second. And so, Auburn, I think, has some ground to make up in that department because LSU recruit. I mean, they have the number 3 recruiting class this year. They recruit really well. Yeah. They'll bounce back just fine. I mean, they're returning everybody or most everybody from that team last year. And so, Auburn's got some ground to make up, but to get above that number 4 spot, like you guys were talking about, because I think Texas A&M and LSU have a bit of an edge right now.
Go ahead, Rob. I'm gonna jump in, Nick. And we talked about, Alabama being a machine. I know this is not an Alabama, podcast, but at the end of the day, that is, Auburn's biggest rival. And it kind of seems like the blueprint is out there in order to how to beat Alabama. And that's having a capable quarterback, being able to throw the ball downfield and not turn the ball over. We saw that with Deshaun Watson. We saw that with Joe Burrow. And it just seems like, if you have that capable quarterback that can throw the ball around and put pressure on, we see it this past year with Kyle Trask. I know, me and Nick are Florida Gator homers, but at the end of the day, that was a game that Florida could have actually came out and won. And that was because the quarterback play. So is Bo Nix, like just going back and talking about Bo Nix, do you see Bo Nix making that, that leap to become one of those elite quarterbacks that can kind of get the job done against the Clemsons, the Alabamas of the world, for the rest of his collegiate career?
Yeah. So he's probably got 2 years left. Because when he first came in, the thought was maybe he'd have 3 because he was a 5-star, leaving after his junior year, but he has none to very minimal NFL stock right now. So I think in terms of talent, yes. You look at those flashes, and I want to say he had a couple of them against Florida 2 years ago where you're just like, how the heck did he make that throw, or how do you make that run or that play? He has these flashes where he looks incredible, and you can definitely see the 5-star talent. And then he has flashes where you really scratch your head and you really make some poor interceptions and poor decisions. And so I think it's sort of rooting out the latter and the former kind of rising to the top. And I think that's coaching, and that's on Bo Nix. And so half of that I think is done because Bo Nix is a grinder. This is a guy who was a team leader as a true freshman, no doubt, in the locker room after the games. And he was a team captain as a sophomore after just one season. So in terms of his work ethic and whether he has the, quote, what I say, want to, or whatever you want to call it, absolutely no doubt. And then he's got the talent. So like we've been talking about a few times on the show already, Harsin and Bobo, I think it's just so big, their marriage and how they're going to sort of meld together and get the DNA of this offense rolling for the passing game in particular. That's going to be so important for the future and for Nix's future. in terms of whether he can be that guy to beat Alabama, I don't think the schedule shakes out very well, because this is an Auburn thing, looking at whether you play Alabama at home or on the road, because I'm sorry, you just don't beat Alabama on the road if you're Auburn. I mean, maybe they will under Harsin, but under Malzahn, it was like, nope, you're losing 45-14, and there's nothing you can do about it. But at home, I mean, Jordan-Hare is once we get back to full stadiums, Jordan-Hare is one of the best home field advantages in the country, and that kind of shows in the Iron Bowl. So they get him at home this year, but, is it a fact of, okay, does he need 2 years to become that really good quarterback, and then all of a sudden you're playing him on the road? So, but that's just life in the SEC West. Is trying to look at whether you play a team like Alabama and Georgia at home or on the road, and trying to figure out your schedule based off that, and chalking up losses. So, but in terms of talent, yes, I do think Bo Nix is the guy, but moving forward, they've got a great freshman quarterback coming in who could maybe be that guy for the future as well. And we know how important the quarterback position is to beating Alabama, and it seems like Auburn will be on the right track because they've done pretty well over the past few seasons in terms of bringing in highly rated guys.
I know we focus on the top of the West here, but they're really the SEC West top to bottom is just fascinating here, with Kiffin and Leach at the Mississippi schools, and Pittman really shocking the world at Arkansas. I mean, the guy's got a ton of energy, big time recruiter from Georgia. I want to know, are you guys kind of keeping an eye on those situations right there? Because I think Kiffin could build quite a program. Leach has a track record of running everybody out in the first year or two, and then getting his guys in there. And I think they're going to be a little more to be reckoned with in the next year or two. But Pittman at Arkansas seems like he could do something too. There's got to be a little bit of level of concern at Auburn about that, or we don't have time to focus on that. We're focused on Bama and LSU and the things that we normally focus on. And we'll let them catch us. We'll let them worry about us.
Sure. The focus is definitely on Alabama and Georgia. And LSU, although Auburn stomped LSU last year, but a lot of people did that. But
Not
yeah,
everybody.
I mean, I think the SEC. Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. The SEC West, I see no reason why in a couple years, like every coach in that league is not really good. Because I'm like you. I mean, look, one of the reasons Malzahn got fired is because a lot of people thought he should have lost 2 more games. There was a controversial ending against You're asking if Arkansas and Ole Miss, teams like that, if they have Auburn fans' attention, 100%, Auburn probably should have lost both those games because there was a call the officials made. Now, with the way it's like flashbacks to last October, like Arkansas and Ole Miss fans in my mentions, like I'm like having PTSD. But I mean, the calls at the end of those games, I mean, if they had gone the other way, they would have lost 2 more games. So the way that Arkansas sort of immediately took on Pittman's identity, I thought was really cool.
Shocking.
I think shocking. I mean, that team was terrible.
Right away. You saw the change right away.
Yeah.
And I don't think that speaks very highly of Chad Morris, but I mean, I think a lot of people didn't think he was very great. And so, and then Ole Miss, I mean, same thing. I think they sort of took on, I mean, shoot, they didn't almost beat Alabama, but they went out there and scored a lot of points. And I can't remember how many they scored against Florida and teams like that, but it seemed like every single game they just went out there and did whatever they want. Now the defense was absolutely atrocious, and I agree with you about Mississippi State that they were really bad this season, but it takes a while for Mike Leach to get his system in there. And while I think he's kind of a weird coach that I don't necessarily hold a very high opinion of as a person, you can't argue with the results that he's put up. So yeah, there's no reason why this entire league will not be really, really good in a few years. And luckily for Auburn, I don't think they've got a dud of a head coach right now. I think they've got a guy with a really good resume. And there's no reason for them to think that he won't be really good moving forward too. So yeah, going to be interesting to watch kind of how this league progresses, how the SEC West progresses, because there's pretty much no duds right now.
Well, hey, Bryan Harsin, we spent about the last 45 minutes just talking about the SEC West. Like, we didn't even get into the East and what's going on over there. So good luck to Bryan Harsin, man. That's going to be that's a tough gig, but certainly Auburn's got the pedigree. Auburn's in the hunt. Year after year, they're in the hunt. So they should have no issue establishing that. But a lot of moving pieces out West, and it should be fascinating to see how he fits in. Nathan, you got anything you want to plug before we get out of here tonight? We really appreciate your time, man. It was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, of course. I had a good time too. Y'all do a really good job.
Thanks.
By Nathan King on Twitter. if you want to follow me on there. And then we talked about it a little bit, but Auburn Undercover, just started working there shortly after I graduated, and it's awesome. It's like a dream job, and we have like 10 stories a day. So if you want to know anything about Auburn, our staff is huge, and we cover everything under the sun. So if you're ever interested in Auburn, there's nowhere else you need to go than auburnundercover.com. We got everything covered.
And you got a podcast too. Auburn
Undercover. The Auburn Undercover podcast. If you would like to subscribe to it, we've got some good stuff planned here in the next few months here in the off season in terms of guests and whatnot. So you can find the link to that in my bio on Twitter. And you can subscribe to that. So, but subscribe to y'all's first if you're listening to it, and then go subscribe to it.
Auburn Undercover by Nathan King on Twitter. Hey, we'll post that when we're getting out of here too. But hey, Nathan, we appreciate your time. And we look forward to bugging you about Auburn football in the future, man.
Please do. I had a great time. Appreciate y'all.
Yeah, man.
No problem. Great time, Nathan.
We'll send it out with a word from our sponsor, Coach Paint.
American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tell a straight video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
Thank you for listening to American Football Stories podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, American Football Stories. We are working to grow our network on YouTube, and we'll love to have you subscribe. You can find us also on Apple Podcasts, on Twitter, at American FB Story, and on our website, AmericanFootballStories.com. I am Robert Parker. My co-host is Nick Knudsen. This has been another episode of American Football Stories.